So we're going to move on to Unit 5. The first topic here is attention, the various forms of attention, and the various models that explain how attention happens, or like the effects that you observe in day-to-day life. Okay. So we have the basic definitions of attention here. So it also says it's a concentration of mental effort, okay, on sensory or even like mental events. So if you focus on something, that can either be external in terms of sensory input, or it can be internal in terms of your own memory or your own imagination. So it's a concentration of mental effort on your own thoughts or imagination or memories, or whatever that happens on the external world in terms of sensory information. So that is what attention is. It's basically mental effort. Another word for attention can be like concentration or mental effort. So these are like synonyms of attention. So these are the various definitions. So of course, definitions are some things that are not usually asked unless it's definitions of intelligence or something like that, because that is a well-researched concept. So I don't think definition of attention and such things will be asked in the net. So you can like just go through it, but it's not entirely necessarily important. So yeah, we'll move to the forms of attention. So we have like broadly two main forms. The third one mentioned here is like a sub form of the selective attention. If you take any cognitive psychology book, you will be like seeing of two different forms. One is divided attention, other is selective attention. If it's not selective attention, they'll use a term called focused attention. It means the same thing. It doesn't mean there's another type called focused attention. So selective attention is also sometimes called focused attention. So the other thing is divided attention. So these are the two broad forms of attention. So under selective attention, we usually have something called sustained attention. Okay? So the main difference is that in selective attention, so you are required to focus on one particular task while you ignore other tasks. Okay. So suppose you're in a loud, loud place, marketplace, or a party or something, and you get a phone call, and you're supposed to take that phone call there. You're not allowed outside, as in the door is closed or something. But still, you'll be able to focus on the call while ignoring the other things. So that is where you're selectively paying attention to the call while ignoring the noise surrounding you, right? So that is what we call as selective attention. So in divided attention, so we divide attention simultaneously to several things. So based on the demands on our mental abilities or demands from the environment, we have like several kinds of tasks that we do simultaneously. So suppose you're talking to someone on the phone and you're also like taking notes or something like that. So that could be like divided attention. Or you're like when you're driving a car, you're driving the car and also talking to the passenger next to you or something like that. So those are like examples of divided attention. So the thing with divided attention is that when you divide attention between two or more tasks, the performance will be like kind of worse than when you do it like alone, as in like when you do the task by itself without dividing it, so that performance will be better. But when you divide it, the performance usually like suffers, as in like unless it is well practiced, the performance usually like dips. So if the task is well practiced, the performance dip may not be like that significant. So practice is one of the factors that influences divided attention, in the sense that, so if you're like driving a car for the first time, you'll not even be able to like, shift gears and like put the clutch and all that. So you'll definitely not be able to have a conversation with another person. But if you're used to driving a car, so you'll be easily like driving a car, switching gears, like pulling the clutch brake and all that, and also tuning the AC, like FM radio, or changing the AC level or something like that, and also having a conversation with the passenger, maybe. So the level of practice influences how effectively you divide the attention. So also the level of difficulty and all that. So we'll be having a lot of models of attention that is going to explain how we divide attention, or how we're going to like select a particular stimulus from a wide variety of stimulus. So selective attention has one advantage in terms of evolution, in the sense it helps us focus on one thing while being able to ignore other things. If not for selective attention, we'll be like bombarded with a lot of input. So selective attention plays a huge role in being able to focus on one thing. So another form of selective attention is sustained attention. So this is where you're selectively focusing on one task over a prolonged period of time. So this is also called a task of vigilance. We also call it vigilance, so also called sustained attention. So the major observation here is that, so when you do something for a prolonged period of time, the performance declines as the time goes on. Okay. So if let's say your task is to follow a particular fish in an aquarium, okay, and after 10 minutes you get so bored, or you get like so, demotivated or tired maybe, so you stop following that fish in the aquarium, and suddenly someone asks you, what does the fish do, you say that I stopped following, right? So there's a decline in performance as time wears on because of fatigue or lack of interest or other physiological things. So the sustained attention depends on the neurological and physiological state of a person. So earlier we had the example of caffeine and all that, right? So if a person has a lot of caffeine, so it stimulates your nervous system, especially the sympathetic nervous system, that has to do with arousal, right? So you are more alert there. So if it is like the parasympathetic nervous system, you're more relaxed and you're more drowsy, so you'll not be able to do it. So it's not entirely like watertight like that. Sometimes stress can reduce your sustained attention, sometimes stress can improve it. So it all depends on the physiological state, so internal psychological state and also the neurological state. So if the person is interested, so they'll have like a lot of sustained attention. So if the person is like very tired, they may not be having sustained attention. So all those things. If a person has like, let's say, a neurological condition like ADHD, right? So they may not be able to focus for a long period of time. So these are the various forms of attention. So hope that was clear. So we'll be moving on to the models of attention. So we have something called the filter theories and something called the capacitive models. So we have like early selection theories or filter theories, and we have the capacitive model. Okay. So we'll be going to the filter theory first. So filter theory says that it's about selective attention. So filter theory basically explains how selective attention works. So it says that when you focus on something, so you only focus on one thing while ignoring the other because you filter other things out. Okay. So there are various forms of filter theories. So we have early filter, we have late filter, and something in between. Yeah. So we have like late selection and we have early selection. Okay. So in early selection, we have two forms or two different models. So we'll be looking at that. So some of the observations it is going to explain are these: the cocktail party effect. Okay. So the example that I gave earlier. So in a noisy situation like a party, so you're still able to have a conversation over phone. If you're supposed to be in there and you're supposed to take a call there itself, you'll still be able to have a conversation there. Even though the room is entirely noisy, you're still able to do that, right? So that is what we call as cocktail party effect. Yeah. So apart from that, let's say in the same room, in the same noisy room, so when you're like having a conversation with someone else, you're kind of ignoring the other things, right? So you're ignoring everything else in the room because it's noisy, and suddenly somewhere from the room someone calls you, right? So now that becomes a cocktail party effect, in the sense that you pay attention to this one, right? So now this, even though you were ignoring it earlier, you're like focusing on that particular thing that you were earlier ignoring. So this is something that will be explained in these models. So we have like early filter theory and then like late filter theory. Okay? So the early filter theory says that you're gonna focus on one thing, and this focus happens early on in the processing. Okay? So I'm going to show you the image so that you can understand it better. So one model is the switch model in early selection. So it says that we can like switch between one channel and another channel. So but this switch happens much earlier. So when some information falls on your sensory register, maybe auditory or visual, so it falls on your sensory memory. So you choose which one you want to focus on, and the remaining things they're not focused on. You do not like focus on them entirely. Okay. So this helps explain how you're able to talk with someone on the phone even in a noisy room, right? So this is the switch model. So you switch on to a particular channel or a particular information, and you switch off everything else. So you basically ignore everything else, and those things are not processed at all. So if you were to draw this, so let's say you're focusing on this one, so this is turned on, so you're only like processing this information. So this information is not processed at all. Okay. So this is the switch model. Okay. So this was given by Broadbent. He proposed this on and off switch model like an exact switch. So he took the analogy of a switch, right? So you either process that information or you don't process it at all. So it's either on or it's either off. So attention is like based on the physical attributes. So you only know what you're listening to only after you process it. So the processing happens here, but before processing it, you only know whether the stream of information is loud or whether the stream of information is like of high pitch or low pitch, whether the volume is low or high. But you don't know anything about the meaning. Only when you like pay close attention to it, you'll be able to process it. Okay? So attention here is based on the physical attributes of the messages. So it is not about the meaning, but it's about the physical attribute of messages. So in this model, we do not like process things unconsciously. We focus on this thing, so this is more conscious. Okay, so it's not unconscious. So we do not process some things automatically. So according to this switch model, so we do not process anything unconsciously. Okay? So whatever you do not attend to, they're not processed at all because there is no unconscious processing in the switch model. So the switch is like exactly tuned to the physical quality of the signal, let's say pitch or the volume or something like that. So you cannot know whatever was present in the unattended message. So you're attending to this one, so you'll not like pay attention to this one. Okay. So if any question is asked in this message, you're not able to answer, but you may be able to say that it was high pitch or it was of high volume or like it was like a slow rate of speech or something like that. The physical attributes can be answered, but the meaning and other things may not be answerable. Okay? So this is the switch model. So this actually does not answer certain things. So after the switch model was given, so a lot of people started researching on it. So Cherry in 1953, so they started researching on this particular switch model and the early selection theory. So there was a particular experimental paradigm. So it is a combination of dichotic listening and shadowing. So dichotic listening task looks like this. So where a person is given one information in one year and the other information in the other year. So you have like two different inputs in two different years. So this is called a dichotic listening task. So by this, you're able to see whether a person is listening to one channel or the other channel. But you're not able to say that they were like switching the channels. So how do you know that this person is listening to only left? And how do you know that this person is not listening to the right one in between? So you may not know that. So to do that, the person is asked to shadow it also. So shadowing is basically a task where the person is asked to repeat whatever they are following. So shadowing is a procedure where the listener is required to follow or repeat verbally whatever message they are like currently hearing. Okay. So in this particular experiment, dichotic listening and shadowing was both combined. Okay. So sometimes what happens is in various experiments, so they switched the years or they switched the inputs. So example, in this one, so they're saying like one message is asking how was the date last night. So suddenly whatever information comes here is supposed to come here is switched to the left one, and whatever information was supposed to be on, like let's say history is being narrated. The French Revolution began in 1978, and then they talk about the fights that happened. Suddenly that switches to the right or the left ear, so they interchange. Now instead of like focusing only on the left or right ear, the person switches based on the meaning. Okay. So earlier, the sensory or the switch model said people focus on only the physical quality of the signal, not on the meaning. So if the channels are switched, people still follow whatever was present based on the meaning, not only on the sensory information. So this led to another model, which we call the attenuator model. So this attenuator model is based on what we have like in terms of like, let's say, a regulator, a fan regulator, or thermostat regulator. So this one was given by Treisman. So this is also an early selection model in the sense that the selection process or the filter happens before processing. So it is like happens before the processing. So it is still early. So it is not like late, or it is like not much later. It is still an early selection model. But the thing is, it has like a certain attenuating properties, or it is capable of regulating whatever you hear. So in this one, instead of you entirely switching out the unattended channel, you tune them down or you regulate them down. Okay. So if your task is to pay attention to message one, you pay attention to them entirely. Okay. But if your task is not to pay attention to the second message, it's not that you entirely ignore them. So some amount of that information is still taken in, but at a lower rate, or at a deregulated rate, at a less tuned rate. Okay. So that is what the attenuator model says. So our attention process is like a regulator where we can tune up certain information and we can tune down certain information. Right? So this is the attenuator model, which was given by Treisman in 1964. So attention here is a matter of the degree of attention we pay. Okay, so it's a matter of the amount of regulation that we do. So most of the information is allowed through, but it is kind of like regulated at lower levels. So you can like attend to two things at the same time, but this one is still lower. So this is why if you're in a noisy room and you're talking to someone on the phone, and if you're ignoring the noise and someone from there is calling your name, you're still able to listen to their name because your name goes through in the unattended channel, and you're talking to someone like a convo is happening in the attended channel. Okay, you're still able to listen to the name because you're still processing it very mildly. Okay, so if you're like not at all processing this, you'll not be able to hear your name, but name is something that will be like easily like perceived in even in a noise or something. So that is why the attenuator model is a modification of the earlier one, which was the switch. So Treisman suggests that physical cues, just like in the switch model, can be used to tune the attenuator. But however, the attenuator or the regulator that we tuned, right? So they can also be influenced by meaning of previously analyzed material, or whatever material we've already like stored. That can be used as the regulator. Suppose you like some particular topic, or like some topic is of very interest or of importance to you, and that topic is being like is the content in the second channel. So you'll probably process it, and then you will switch the attenuation, and you will like probably switch to this channel entirely and tune this channel down. So the processing is not entirely only physical, it is also by meaning. So it is also semantic to a certain degree. Okay? So that is why you are able to like process or switch information based on meaning. So this is the attenuator model that explains a lot of things. The first model was not able to. The first model is the switch model. So it says we ignore everything and focus on one thing, but the attenuator model says we regulate the amount of volume that we take in, but we do focus on several things at the same time, but at a regulated manner. So something are tuned up, something is tuned down. Okay? So this model suggests that partial analysis of all signals do occur. So this is where another theory came in, because the attenuator model says partial analysis of all signals occur. So some people said that why not complete analysis, right? So that is where the late model comes in. So the late model comes in and it says we have a tendency to process everything, but we only like respond to one thing at a time. Okay, so this was given by Deutsch and even like Norman gave this particular late model later. So here selective attention is assumed to operate only on response output. So we have that filter. So that filter is not during the selection period, but it happens later. So if we're gonna see here, so this is the filter that happens, but this is from the early selection one, right? So according to late selection, the filter happens much later. So there is no filter here, but after you process the meaning of everything, you choose to respond to only one thing. You choose to respond to this message, but you do not respond to this message. So the filter is in terms of response, so not in terms of processing or not in terms of selecting, but in terms of choosing a particular response. Okay? So that is the late selection method. So suppose, let's say you're in a traffic signal, right? So you focus on the signal, you also focus on like someone who's like honking the horn behind you, and you like choose to let them go ahead, right? Because you focus on the signal and see it is still on red, so you're not supposed to go there. So this model says that we are capable of unconsciously processing several things. So the early selection models, they say we do not unconsciously process several things. So all of the processing that happens in early selection model, they're more conscious. So sometimes you may be zoned out when watching a movie, right? But still, you still know what basically happened in the movie. So some things you may remember, some things you may not remember. So the late selection model says we process everything, but since you chose to respond to another thing, probably a text on like a phone or something, the movie was something that was processed, but it was not responded to. So because it was not responded to, it was not stored in the memory. It was because of that you forgot it. Okay? So it's not entirely true in terms of like how we do it, right? So we do our attention capacity is like limited, right? So we cannot like process everything in our environment, but we do process something. So the late model is an extreme version of processing everything, unconsciously, or like we do process them unconsciously. But the early selection model is another extreme version, which says we process only one thing and there is no unconscious process. So the truth is somewhere in between the early selection and the late selection. Okay? So the late selection still they like take a lot of arguments, and they say that even when choosing to respond, even when we know that we are looking at the TV and also like focusing on the phone, that is still late selection because you're still processing it, but you're only choosing to respond to that. So, but if we are asked what happened in the TV, we may not remember it entirely. That is because that information was not entirely stored. But these people like argue that that is still entirely processed, but it is not only stored. So it is not stored because you do not respond to it. So it is because you do not respond to it, you do not remember it. So that is the late selection series argument. So the researchers that we are talking about here are like Deutsch and Norman. So they are the supporters of late selection theory, and the ones who talked about the early selection are Treisman and Broadbent. So Broadbent gave the switch model, and you have Treisman giving the attenuator model, right? So any doubts or questions regarding the first model? Filter models, early selection, attenuation, and late selection. Now, shall we move on to the next topic? Any doubts, questions?
No.
Okay. Right. So we have something called the capacity model, right? So in capacity, so we have a limited capacity to, yeah. So we have a limited capacity to process information, right? So the amount of information that we take in is not entirely processed because we have a limited capacity. So we cannot like process everything in a visual field. We only like process limited things. So Daniel Kahneman presented a slightly different model for what attention is. So according to him, attention is the cognitive process of categorizing and reorganizing stimulus. So in the previous models, attention is something like choosing what to focus on. So this is more like a theory of divided attention. Okay. So this is one of the capacity models. According to him, different tasks require different amounts of capacity. So easy tasks are like require only less mental effort, right? Or very difficult tasks require very high mental effort. So if you're asked to juggle 3 or 4 objects, so if you're not used to juggling, so you'll take a lot of mental capacity. It's not like sure that you'll be able to juggle it, but still it will take a lot of mental capacity. But if you're asked to like text a friend, right, it is something that you may be like doing it easily. So even without like looking at it, some people may do it, right? So because it is well practiced or it is easy. So the amount of tasks that you allocate to different tasks, sorry, amount of attention that you allocate to different tasks depends on the task difficulty itself. So he has given this model. So this model depends on several factors. So the first factor is the arousal, as in if you're very alert, right? So you have like a lot of energy to allocate to different tasks. If you're like not very alert, so if you're like drowsy or sleepy, you may not be able to allocate attention to various tasks. So it is like very simple like that. So the amount of arousal is what leads to allocation of attention, but the allocation happens based on certain policy. So that is what he calls allocation policy. So attention here is allocated based on the allocation policy. So we have like 3 allocation policies here. So one is enduring disposition, the other is momentary intention, and lastly it's evaluation of demands. So let's say you have 2 different tasks. So one task is watching a movie, and the other task is reading, let's say, quantum mechanics or something. Okay? So in the second task, it requires a lot of attention because it's something entirely new and it's something you have never read it, right? So it is of very high demand. So things that are of very high demand are things that are given more attention. So you give more attention to things that are like difficult, but you'll give like less attention to watching TV because it is not that difficult. So that is about the evaluation of demands. So when we talk about momentary intention, so momentary intention is something that you have to do right now. So what is your intention? As in like what do you want to do? Okay. So if you want to do like let's say you have an exam tomorrow in quantum mechanics, so you'd be more likely to focus attention on the book rather than the TV, right? So this is a second factor. It says you're more likely to focus attention on one thing over other because it is more urgent or more important. Okay? So there's a third factor which talks about your habits or which talks about your preferences. Okay. So if you have let's say a preference to read, right? So it is much easier to allocate attention there. If you have a habit of not reading, so then it will be like very difficult to allocate attention to it. So if you don't like reading, you'll probably like not allocate your attention to that particular thing. But if you like TV more, or like if you like to watch, educational video rather than read a book, you'll be like having a lot of attention to that educational video rather than the book. So reading it like is maybe boring for you. So you may not like do that. So you may choose to watch a YouTube video, which could be educational, and then you could like write your test later. So enduring discussion talks about your habits, your preferences. Momentary intention talks about what you want to do right now, the urgency of a task. So evaluation of demand talks about how difficult a particular task is. So based on all these things, the amount of attention is allocated to several tasks. If a task is high in demand, it will be difficult, it requires more attention. If a task is more urgent, it will be given more attention. Okay. If a task is something that you like, it will be given more attention. So based on a combination of this, a particular task is given less or more attention. Of course, all of these depends on the amount of arousal, in the sense that the amount of one. Yeah. So it all depends on the amount of alertness a person has. If a person just got from sleep, so the person is like less alert. So they'll not be able to allocate attention. If a person is like wide awake, so they'll be able to allocate attention more. So in this model, some tasks require so much capacity that performing them simultaneously is very difficult. You'll only be able to like do them one at a time. So some tasks are very easy that we may be able to do them simultaneously at the same time. Again, the example of driving, right? So if you're like an expert in driving, you may be able to like drive and also have a conversation and also adjust the AC and also like the radio or something. But if you're not an expert in it, so that is a difficult task, you'll be more focused on that task because all of your available capacity will be allocated in that task. So this is the Kahneman's capacity model of attention. So this is more like also a model of divided attention. Hope it was clear. So before we go on to the next one, any questions, doubts? Any particular questions that you want clarified or doubts that you have? Shall we move on to the next one?
Excuse me. I have one question. All these theories, what we have learned now on different models of attention, is it all on divided attention? Basically, I mean, the switch and this capacity model.
No, the switch ones. The switch ones are like selective attention because we have selected there.
This one will come in late selection, right? Because we are kind of divided. The last one which you just explained now, it will come in late selection, right? Because
so the attention themselves, so the attentions themselves are not watertight compartments, right? So if you're driving, so you're focusing on the road, so that can be considered as selective attention, but you're also like talking to someone. So it is not entirely the selective attention, it could be a minor bit of divided
attention. It's everything, right?
Yeah, they're not watertight compartments. Okay. So theoretically they are, but in practical life they will not be. So theoretically we have the filter models that talk about selective attention. Okay. The filter models are selective attention, the switch, the attenuator, and the late selection, they are selective attention, where you choose one thing while ignoring the other things. So this Kahneman's capacity model is about divided attention. So when you are able to do several tasks, so why are you able to do one task better over the other task? So this is a divided attention model. So that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other doubts?
Sir, you spoke about the difficulty of the task, right?
Yeah.
Sir, it differs to person, right?
So yeah, it differs from person to person. Also,
sir,
their experience. Yeah.
Sir, it is about the subconscious and the conscious mind. Can I take it in that order? Because when it becomes easy, it goes to your subconscious, right? When you are driving, it's about your subconscious process.
Yeah, you do it like without much conscious effort. So yes. That is what consciousness again is what we talk about attention here. So you have arousal here, right? So arousal is consciousness. Amount of alertness is again something related to consciousness. So for a difficult task, you have to be more aware. You have to be more conscious. For something that is well practiced, you don't require that much awareness or that much consciousness.
In one line, can it be like arousal depends on the nature of the task, like how it is, how it is important.
Nature as in like difficulty,
difficulty,
is it
yeah.
urgent or is it something you like?
Yeah.
So all these things. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So we'll be moving on to the next one. So we have the automatic processing. So based on this, right? So here Kahneman says that some tasks take a lot of effort and some tasks takes very little effort, right? Because they take very little effort, they're kind of automatically processed. So if you're like doing two well practiced tasks or like easy tasks, you're almost doing it automatically, right? So when you're watching TV and also texting, so texting can sometimes be automatic for some people because they're like so used to it. So here they talk about the ability to automatically process something without conscious awareness. So Walter Snyder and Richard Schifrin, they distinguished between two levels of processing. Okay? So two levels of attention. So one is automatic. On the other hand, you have control processing. So they did not say this one happens first or this one happens later. They only said this can happen and this can also happen. So they did not say which happens first or later. So we'll have another model which talks about the orderness of these things. So for now, the automatic processing is used on tasks that are very familiar. Okay, so if you're used to driving like a bike or even a car, if you're like very familiar to it, it's almost automatically processed. So as soon as you sit in the car, you reach for the key and put it in the ignition. So you don't even think about it. Okay, but if it was something, if it was the first time of a person driving a car, so they'll have to be instructed, take the key, put it in the ignition, and then turn it on like left or anti-clockwise or something like that. And they'll have so many thoughts in their mind. So it is more controlled. It is not automatic because they don't have that memory of it, right? So that will be like more controlled. So for difficult and unfamiliar tasks, we use control processing. So in control processing, we are able to do one thing at a time only because so much of our attention is required. In automatic processing, we can like do several tasks together. We can juggle several tasks together, right? So let's say again, when driving a car, you will still be able to text, even though it's not advisable. You'll still be able to text on the phone, or you'll still be able to have a conversation with a friend, or you'll still be able to change radio or the AC and all those things. So like doing both the things automatically without much of conscious awareness. So that is the automatic process. So a lot of research was done on this. So this proves that automatic processing does happen and even control processing does happen. So in control processing, the condition is that unfamiliar or difficult tasks become very controlled. They take a lot of your attention, right? So familiar tasks, they become very automatic or unconscious. So this is what was tested in a lot of researchers. So this research was again done by the same people who gave the theory, Schneider and Schifrin. Okay. So in their research, participants saw like frames. The frame is like given here. So this is one of the example of a frame. So they saw a frame, a series of 20 frames actually on each trial. So each of there are like 4 locations here. So top right, top left, and bottom right, bottom left, right? So they are either occupied by a series of dots or numbers or alphabets. So the numbers and letters occupy 1 or 2 or all locations. So there are like several conditions. So they were like varied. So those were the variables. So the independent variable was the exposure time. So this frame could be like exposed for 40 milliseconds or it could be exposed for 8 milliseconds. That is as long as 8 seconds, or it could be like half of a second. Okay. So of course, if you like see it for half of a second, you will not be able to take in much information. But if it is short for 8 seconds, you'll be able to take a lot of information. So other one is the difficulty of the task. So here there is something called consistent mapping and there is something called varied mapping. So you have a target letter. Let's say in this frame, is there an A? So if that is the target, you'll be able to say, yeah, there is an A. Or if the target was, let's say, letter X, there is no letter X, you'll be saying there is no letter X. So we know that these letters, right? So they are in the like top left and bottom right positions. So in one condition, these positions were maintained throughout all 20 frames. In the other condition, these frames are varied. So in the sense that the letters could take bottom left or even top left. So they could be like different positions. So of course, in the different positions or varied mapping condition, it requires more attention. It is like slightly more difficult. So this is what they studied. Okay. So the target set could be like different in the sense that in this frame, the target is X. In the next frame, the target could be, let's say, B or L or something. So that is again varied. So the target set size and frame size also keeps on increasing, right? So based on all these variables, they tested the experiment. They changed all these things, and this was the result. So in the easier condition, as in where it was consistently mapped, in the sense that the position of the letters was always in a particular position, the top left or the bottom right. So that was easier because you know that the letters are going to come in this particular position only. It's not going to be anywhere else. So it's much easier. So the frame exposure was the only variable that influenced accuracy. So it did not matter if X came in like the top position or the bottom position. It did not matter if it had one letter or three letters. It did not matter if it had a number or anything, because the position was the same. It was much easier for them to just look at it and answer. Okay. So because of this, it was an easier condition and it happened almost automatically, and their effort or their results were like the accuracy is way higher. So it was more automatically processed. On the other hand, so you have the varied mapping condition where it was like very difficult for them to do it. So it had to like switch constantly. So here the accuracy depended on a lot of things. So the position of the target letter or the number of frame sizes. So because it is changing constantly, you need to know if there are like 4 distractors or 3 distractors or 2 distractors. So all of these things started to matter. So here a lot of conscious attention was required. So the results, the participants, they also like said, so a lot of effort was put into this and a lot of errors were made in the second condition, which is the varied mapping condition. So by this they said people do process things automatically, so which is not present in the earlier models. So this is what was proved in the automatic process control processing model. So the last one is the feature integration theory. So this is given by Anne Treisman. Again, this is the person who gave the attenuator model. So here, this was based on the prior researches which was done by Schifrin and Schneider. So similar to those research or their like division between automatic and controlled processing. So Anne Treisman said that so whenever you view an object, let's say this particular slide, or whenever you view a daily object like a ball or like a vehicle or something, so there's a first stage in which the object falls on our eyes and we immediately break it down into separate features, in the sense that the or red color or the color, the shape, the size and all those things are immediately broken down. So if you like see a rolling red ball, so right, immediate features like the color of the object, the shape being the ball being round, and the movement, which direction it is moving, all these things are broken down and it is like registered on our brains, right? So each of these feature is processed in separate areas of the brain, and you do not have to like process them uh, consciously, so they can like happen parallelly. So this is again pre-attentive stage in which information is processed parallelly and unconsciously. So unconsciously you process them, but to know that it is a ball that is like rolling. So like let's say this ball like rolled so fast. Okay, you'll only be able to say something red flashed in the towards my right or something, but you will not be able to say the shape maybe, because you did not register it, right? Because you only automatically processed some features of it. So because only some features were automatically processed, you are not able to integrate it and say it was a ball or it was a vehicle or something else that crossed through, right? So in the second stage, if you were able to focus on all these features automatically, you integrate them. Okay? So when you integrate them, because of your earlier memories and all that, you integrate them and see, okay, this is what it matches in my earlier memory, and so you label it as a ball which rolls in this particular direction or something. So they found a lot of errors in integration, so which they call as illusory conjunctions. So they did a lot of experiments in it. So there's this there's a green O, there's blue P, and there's black O. Okay. So now, if this was like exposed for a very short period of time, right? And if I ask, what did you see? So some people may say that they saw a red circle or red O. Some people may say that they saw a black T, right? So that is what proves that people do automatically process the individual features. So this error that is called illusory conjunction, it proves that people have a tendency to automatically process the features and then integrate it later using conscious processing. Okay? So if this image, which is shown in the slide, was like flashed for a half a second or something, people would like look at the features and they would not have enough time to integrate them. So they would integrate them like in various combinations. So they may say that they saw a black tea, or they may say that they saw a green tea, or they may say that they saw a blue O or something like that. So that is what we call as illusory conjunctions. So that is it about the various models. So we'll be stopping here and we'll have a brief break here. So Krishnan sir, you want to take over? So any doubts that you want to ask? Because I did not get it. I don't get any questions yet.
Sir,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, so when you're talking about research methodology, you told about the quantitative and qualitative, something related to positivism and constructivism.
Yes,
like
yes.
something.
Yeah, I did.
Can you elaborate that? Like,
So we have to go back to that slide now.
I'm sorry. The two words were about.
Yeah. Since we're going in different units, so this was supposed to be dealt in unit 1. So I do understand that. So this is not.
I'm sorry.
Quantitative and qualitative was the one where we said that in quantitative it's defined in number, and in qualitative it's like good, bad, like that, right?
Yes, yes, that is it. But his question is about positivistic versus constructivistic. It means the same thing, but it has a different historical background, right? So earlier people had this idea that whatever you see is not entirely true. So your sensory information is not entirely true. That is sensationalism, and there was an opposing side which is called rationalism. So that is about the history. We'll do it with in unit 1 again. So after that, they had positivistic or post-positivistic, which said that there is a way in which we can use our senses and still obtain actual real information. If you use a scale, right, your eyesight may be wrong, but the scale could be true, right? So our senses can be aided with these instruments and we can gain information. So that is what the post-positivistic approach is. So that is set out to measure things objectively, right? It requires a lot of or qualitative or positivistic or constructivistic. So
Sir,
your doubts will be clarified in unit 1 again. So yeah, we'll be visiting that again.
So whether these two are connected with the epistemology in philosophy? Like,
yes, yes, it is connected there.
Thank you.
So any other questions regarding the theories of attention part? Because that is what we just saw now. So we just saw the feature integration theory, automatic processing, Kahneman's model, and also the filter theories. Any particular questions or doubts?